All right. Welcome everybody to week 2 of Education Week. Hopefully you've been joining us for all of the other sessions. Last week we had 4 amazing sessions. We had a couple of great panels. We had some great speakers, but tons of knowledge dropped all week last week. And this week's going to be no different. We have some amazing speakers and panelists all week this week. And today we're going to be talking about negotiation, something that we all have to deal with every single day, hopefully every day when you're negotiating deals or doing transactions or whatever in your life, trying to get your kids to do something that you want them to do, or your husbands or your wives, getting them to do something you want to do. Life is all about negotiation. So we wanted to bring to you some great negotiators. Well, you can judge if you think they're great by the end of this panel today, but I think they're all great negotiators. So today we have Mike Everett, Adam Nachmani, Leah Chambers, Nick Giganti, and Jim Roach bringing some knowledge for you today. So the cool thing about this new Zoom, if you haven't downloaded the Zoom 5.0, you can actually move people around on your screen and get them into the positions that you want them to on your screen. So I'm trying to find all the speakers right now so I can move them all to the top of my screen here so I can hear them talk. All right. So we're gonna jump right into this now, and I have a series of questions that I'm going to ask, and we're just going to go down the line. And at the end, you can put your questions in the chat box if you have questions as we go. But at the end, we're going to open it up to questions and answers if you have some specific questions for the panelists that you want to address, and you can address it to them specifically. So Jim, you are first on my screen. So the first question is going to go to you, and then we're just going to go down the line from there. So before we get started, I want to just talk about, and I want to hear from everybody, what is your definition of negotiation success? So when do you feel like you have success in a negotiation? What does a successful negotiation look like to you?
Well, Noah, thanks obviously for putting this together. Appreciate it. Obviously, Education Week's always a great week, and this is a little different than we usually do it, but appreciate you having me on. So, negotiations, when they asked me to, talk about this, it's something obviously I have a lot of passion for. Right on my desk, actually, right here, I have my Never Split the Difference book that I've read a couple of times here. So, it's something I take quite seriously. But negotiation to me, and negotiation success is obviously, in my opinion, it's presenting and putting together the best possible deal for your clients. Our fiduciary responsibilities to our clients are to, obviously represent them to the best of our abilities. So as long as I'm putting my client in the best position to have a successful deal, that's what I see as a negotiation success. It's putting my client in the best position to, whether to acquire, to sell, whatever they need with their end goals. As long as I can put that together, that's a negotiation success to me.
Awesome. And we're definitely going to dive more into some of the stuff you talked about in a minute. But Mike, tell us a little bit about what you believe a successful negotiation looks like.
Thank you, Noah. It's great to be here. I appreciate the time. The way that we define negotiation, a successful negotiation, is through a collaborative style, a win-win style. And if you think of, there's a book called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury, and they define it as maximizing results for your client while adequately satisfying the other side and minimizing the influence of third parties. And so it's just making sure that both sides of the deal beat whatever their next best deal was, or what we call their BATNA, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So beat the BATNA, make sure that you strongly advocate and maximize results for your client, but still you have to satisfy adequately the needs on the other side, because that's how you get a deal done.
Yep, I agree. All right, Leah, take a deep breath. It's coming to you. What do you define as a successful negotiation?
Honestly, in my position, it's for the graceful exit for both the seller and then a new entry for the buyer, keeping everyone happy, making sure that everything is balanced out and that there isn't, I guess, like a tipping of the scale for either side.
Yep, I'm with you on that. All right, Adam, and tell us about yours, and then Nick, we're going to finish off with you on this question.
Sure. First off, thanks, Noah. I appreciate you putting this all together. And I think I'm pretty similar to Mike. I think we read some of the same material. But it's basically, for me, a successful negotiation is one where I've achieved or substantially achieved what my client's goal is in either the transaction or the settlement, whatever it might be. I find it's really hard for everyone to walk away totally happy, depending on what the transaction is. But yeah, my goal is to reach my client's goal, and that's how I look at it, as a successful negotiation.
Yep. And sometimes you have to remember, in a negotiation, the end goal is not always to get the best price. Sometimes it's just to get your client what it is that they're looking for. Sometimes if we're talking about real estate, it's just about getting them the house that they want, not necessarily always at the best price, just to getting them the house that they want. And it's always important to keep in mind what it is that your client wants, so you can negotiate on their behalf the best you can. Nick, finish us off. You're on mute, Nick.
Sorry about that. Thanks again, Noah, for putting this together. I would say a successful negotiation is understanding the target of what both parties are trying to get to, and successfully getting there. Whether it be that both parties are super happy at the end, it might not be the case, but the fact that you get it done and you succeed in actually closing the deal, I would say that's a successful negotiation.
Yeah, I would agree with what everybody has to say. Nick, I want to stick with you for a second. So
Yep.
Now that we understand how you define a successful negotiation, and it's important to define what that is, because really that is the end goal, right? The end goal is success. So we need to understand what success looks like in the negotiation, and then we can work backwards to figure out what our plan is going to be to get there. So what are the main things that you do to prepare for the negotiation discussion so you can actually get to that end goal that you want?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I teach the agents on my team this. I'm very big with doing a lot of research on the people that are in the transaction, whether it be a buyer or seller. Asking a lot of questions. You kind of want to be almost like an FBI agent, where you're kind of finding, the biggest thing is what you're trying to find is their motivation. You're trying to find the type of personality they are, and you're trying to find what motivates them, because that is going to be the end all be all for what you're going to negotiate off of later on in the deal. If someone is saying that they want to retire or they want to move somewhere, because they're getting older, well, when it comes to that time when you're going to get the offer, that's what you're going to kind of bring up and remind them that this is why we're in this situation in the first place. So in order to be a successful negotiator and have a successful negotiation through the course of a deal, it's absolutely integral that the people that you're working with and what makes them tick, and most importantly, what their motivation is for selling or buying the property.
When you're talking about the people you work with, are you going as deep as understanding the agent on the other side of the deal and how much business they do and how important this deal means to them in the negotiation?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously it's almost like a game of poker a little bit. And then when you're going through when you're working with another agent, yeah, you're kind of figuring out who that person is that's selling the property, or in any case, buying the property. But yeah, you want to kind of get to know how that other agent ticks too, and kind of build rapport with them. Because again, the way I am, you want to be on the same team with that other agent, because it's in all of our best interests to try to get the deal done. Yeah, we want to look out for our client, but let's work together and find a middle place where everybody is going to walk away from this and feel like they won, and that's basically our job. Yeah.
No, great stuff, man. Adam, let me ask you, how do you prepare for negotiations to get to the end result you want?
Sure. So my negotiations, I know this is primarily real estate related, so I'll focus on that, but my negotiations run from real estate relationships to litigation as well. So there's a different dynamic depending on what kind of negotiation I'm handling. To focus just on the real estate side of it, the first thing that I'll try to do is meet with my client and figure out what their goals are, figure out what they want to achieve in the transaction. Most of the time, it's pretty simple. They want to acquire the property for the best price possible. There are other considerations, obviously, that go into that, but that is their ultimate goal. So first, I'll figure out, what their goal is, again, like we talked about before. Then I'll figure out who the people are involved in the transaction. who the other side is, what their motivations might be in the transaction, who the other agent is, exactly like you said. In my case, sometimes it's who the other attorney is. Do I know that they're a difficult negotiator? Do they know that they usually cave on certain aspects of the deal? Those are the type, and are there certain components that they look at a deal differently than me, where I say to my client, well, we can push on this and then back off later, because this is where this agent will usually suggest to their client that they either back off that part of the deal or terminate the deal. But that's really what I would do for initial preparation. Let me see if I have any other notes. And then just give my client my honest opinion based on my experience on where this transaction will go, because the most important thing that you can do is generate a good rapport with your client so they know that you're working in their best interests in order to achieve their goals.
So when you're going into the negotiation and the attorney or the other agent on the other side of the deal, and you know that they cave on certain things, are you putting additional things in the deal that you know that your client doesn't want, just so you can pull them back? So for example, if we're talking about real estate, it might be a lower initial deposit, or a really long home inspection, or a really long closing date, knowing that you're going to pull those things back because the main thing your client cares about is the price. So you're putting all these other things in so you can pull them back. Do you employ that strategy?
Sometimes. I mean, this market better than I do, but the market is crazy right now. So employing those strategies can be dangerous. They could backfire. Right now, what I would probably do is, if I know that I put in a 60-day inspection contingency, which generally I don't think will blow a deal, but I know that my client could really get it done probably in 20 days. Those types of things might be what I would include in the initial transaction, but I know that we have some wiggle room on, some additional buffers that I've given us, and then pull back on them in exchange for some other consideration from the other side, because usually people like to feel like they're getting something in exchange for something. So those can sometimes be easy gimmies, but you have to be really careful, because if you reach too hard, you could blow up a deal on your first offer because they get another offer that's more attractive.
Yep. And I failed to properly introduce everybody. I know we have some real estate people on here, attorneys. So Adam obviously is an attorney. Leah, you want to tell a little bit about what you do, and then you can jump into how you prepare to.
Sure. So I'm very different from everyone else, it seems. So I actually am a short sale negotiator. I do less of the negotiation between the buyer and the seller, and more so with the seller's lender and any lien holders. So for my preparation is a little bit different. I actually have to start off with, once I've engaged the seller, once I've engaged the buyer, I then have to review the title, kind of know what my playing field is going to be, see who I'm going up against, and trying to fit everyone in a very perfect square. The biggest preparation portion of this is to kind of expectations, which I can probably get into later, and I see it's another question, but giving them realistic guidelines. So there's nothing short about a short sale. I'm sure agents have heard some of the major horror stories about it, but they really aren't that bad if you are, abiding by appropriate guidelines. But the biggest thing is to actually advise the good and the bad of my portion of the negotiation, where it may not reach what the buyer wants, may not reach what the seller wants, but what it's going to take to get to that end line, essentially.
Yeah, I wish I would have known you back in 2008 and 2009 when I was doing a lot of short sales, but I was negotiating them myself. I would have been happy to have that taken off my plate. All right, Mike, tell everyone a little bit about what you do, and then how do you prepare for negotiations?
All right, great. Well, I am a senior vice president and a certified national instructor with the Real Estate Negotiation Institute, and we offer, as you can see in the background, MC&E and C&E, certified negotiation expert, master certified negotiation expert designations in 2 classes that we offer. And I am an active real estate agent. Recently moved from Texas to Florida, currently working on my broker's license in Florida. And I've been teaching negotiations in real estate for about the last 6.5 years. And so it's a passion of mine. It absolutely transformed my business when I first took the courses originally. And so I can't recommend, regardless of where you get your information, whether it's through a class or whether it's through reading books, negotiation is critical to a realtor's success, because you don't get any negotiation training in pre-license. And so it's typically agents come into the business with a void in that area. The way that I prepare, I look at it a couple of different ways. First of all, the first step in preparation is preparing myself. I want to make sure that I have a strategy, that I review what my personal approach to my clients is, the things that I want to make sure that I find out from them. As everybody has mentioned, that has to do with their goals, their objectives. I want to assess what their negotiation style is, because you can't really negotiate for your clients unless you're able to negotiate with your clients. And then once we sit down and we identify those goals, then as everybody has talked about, it's a matter of getting a sufficient and usually a superior amount of information on everybody that's involved in the aspects of the deal, so that your ability to negotiate on behalf of your client doesn't bring any surprises and builds a lot of confidence and trust with them. We really recommend the book, The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. It is the premise of the book is that decisions happen faster in an atmosphere of trust. And the more trust you're able to build both with your client and with your counterpart on the other side, the much easier the negotiations become, because they're much more willing to accept your offers, your positions, and work with you in a collaborative manner than if you are, shall we say, less cooperative in your approach. The step after preparing me then obviously is preparing the client. I don't want them to be surprised by anything. I need them to understand that the best deal is not always the ideal, and that things do come up. And if something surprises you that you're not expecting, don't worry, because that's why I'm here, is to help work you through that, give you the right kind of sound advice, and try to explore all the options, possible exchanges, anything we can come up with to put together a deal that works best for them.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. If you guys missed the book, I put it in the chat, Speed of Trust, Stephen Covey. And I liked your quote where you said the best deal is not always the ideal. That's true. That's very good. All right, Jim, you're a real estate agent. You work at KW Philly. How do you prepare for negotiation discussions? And I'm going to throw another question in for you as well that you can tag on to the end. How do you prepare for this situation, right? I'm going to give you a situation. Buyer makes a low, properties listed for 500,000. Buyer makes a lower offer, but the offer's reasonable based upon the comps, right? So let's say the offer comes in at 425,000, right? Seems like a low offer, but the comps could potentially support 425 on the buyer's end. The seller could potentially support 500,000 on the seller's end. You are the listing agent. How are you preparing for that strategy? What is your strategy in that type of negotiation to try to make a deal?
Yeah, so kind of, I guess, two-part question. That second part was a little loaded, so we might have to run through that again. But as far as preparing myself really for negotiation, I'm a big note taker before I really get in and I present an offer. And I do this with pretty much everything. I never send an agreement to sale blind. There's always some discussion and some, alerting the other side that this is potentially coming through and how you're structuring X, Y, and Z. I'm looking at a number of different things. I'm looking at, how much equity they have in their home, how much, what percentage they put down. There's a lot of stuff out there in public records that you can actually go out and research and figure out, okay, they put 20% down. So they have, a lot of equity sitting in this position. I'm also looking at the agent's experience. I'm going on Bright and I'm looking at how much business they're doing on the list side, how much business they're doing on the buy side, what's their list to sell percentage ratio, meaning, they list at $500,000 and they typically sell within 99% of that price. I look at a couple of different things so I can understand what I'm really jumping into and what I'm understanding and, the person that I'm working with on the other side. As far as, on the listing side, I think it's the question that you kind of position is really kind of tailored back to setting those clients' expectations up front. I'm an under promise, over deliver type of person. That's the sort of the approach I take on everything. So I let them know sort of the market capacity we're in. We use the Lord report. We use different things along those lines that's going on. What's the real seasonality of the city? How are things going as far as, projects out in the area, what's going on, or, you know, in different sort of situations along those lines. So, you know, I kind of try to set those positions and set those situations up front. And I always, in the listing appointments, let those clients know that these are going to happen. I think it's an old school sort of thought process that, you know, everybody just goes out and looks at real estate and just throws offers in on things. I don't really think that's the world we live in now. Clients are really only putting that offer and that agreement on paper when they're seriously interested. So I position that and then explain that to them and sort of set that expectations that, you know, this may be a little bit lower of where we're really truly expecting, but I think there's something that we can work here. The client put an offer in, they have their pre-approval, they filled out their BFI, here's a picture of their deposit, everything along those lines. And we have that all set up front for them. So when we get these offers, we can go to them with all the full supporting documentation, as compared to, hey, Bill Smith just called me. He said, you know, his client likes the house, but only paid $400 for it. There's no real value to that. So having everything outlined and upfront and having that fully completed in your hand gives you a better opportunity to kind of present your client and go to your client and sit down and run them through those things.
So back to my situational question.
Yeah, I don't remember that because you.
Yep.
So
yep.
run me through again.
I'm going to run you through it again. You represent the seller, and you have the list price is 500,000.
Yep.
Maybe it's a little overpriced, but you can justify it. The offer comes in at 425,000, which seems like a low offer compared to the listing price, but it's justifiable, right? Your job is to get your client the highest possible price. What is your strategy to go into there? And I'm going to give you a couple multiple choice questions. The last one is other, so you can fill in the blanks, but are you going back and saying the offer is too low, my client is not countering? Are you giving them a small counter offer like 495, or are you coming to 450, you know, to try to make the deal happen, or fill in the blank other? How are you approaching that situation to come to an agreement?
I'm taking everything into consideration. Obviously, when you put a property up, you know, say the property's on the market for 30, 60 some days, there may be no active competition coming on the market. There may be some new recent comps that are kind of justifying the lower sales price. So I'm kind of bringing everything that I possibly can to justify my price, but also doing that on the other side to the seller to prepare them to kind of sort of, you know, meet in the gap here. I'm a big proponent of, regardless of what the offer is, always at least bringing a counter offer. It takes two to tango here. So, you know, I'm always big on at least bringing something back to them. So I'm going to position it in both ways, and both sides being a little bit differently. You know, I'm going to obviously go to the buyer side and say, hey, you know, you're way out of whack here. X, Y, and Z supports us where we stand here. That being said, let me go to my client and have a discussion. And then when I'm going to my client and having that discussion, I'm bringing their point of view and their perspective here, and kind of explaining to them, you know, this is why they're pricing it this way. This is why they're presenting it this way. These are their terms X, Y, and Z. A lot of times the deals too, especially in the real estate world, terms are just as good and just as important as prices. So if there's a lot of, you know, if this is a quick close, or this is, you know, no inspection contingencies, you know, I'm adding that up and putting that all in there and bringing that to my client to, you know, kind of show them those sort of things. So I think it's, you know, there's a couple of different ways to present it, but it's just 100% being prepared, having everything outlined for them. So, you know, both sides fully understand where you're coming in and at, and obviously working it from there.
The reason I asked you is because I'm about to make a $425,000 offer on your $500,000 listing today. So I just wanted to understand how you're going to approach this.
Let's stay online after, and we'll settle this thing out.
You know, negotiation has gotten so different since I got into real estate. You know, well, I say it's funny. I say back in the day, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but we used to actually have to call people up on the phone, and we had to communicate and negotiate and present our arguments. And now, you know, I'll get negotiations from agents via text, just literally just like a one line. Here's the counter offer. There's no justification behind it, and there's no skill, I would say, that goes into it anymore. It's more, you know, a lot of real estate agents have become almost like a middleman, just like a liaison between buyer and seller to relay what the buyer and seller has said. And we have to remember that we, as the professionals, we as the real estate agents, need to be the one to come up with the strategy for our clients, and we need to be the one to make the arguments for our clients and make the good points, and sort of be the litigators, the negotiators, to help the other side see the point and that we're trying to make this deal happen. It's changed a lot, but that doesn't mean that the people that are still employing those skills are still the ones that are, I think, the most successful. All right, Mike, I'm going to throw this next one to you. So, what are the important things that you would say that people should focus on in order to be an effective negotiator in real estate?
Well, first of all, to your point just a second ago, I think it's really true that we get a lot of what I would call an unreciprocated offer via the phone or via text, via email. And one of the things that I try to coach my clients on, particularly on the buyer side, if I get a casual offer from a listing agent, which is, it's not an offer, it's what we call an unreciprocated offer. If we go to work on that, we're basically negotiating with ourselves, because even if we agree to it, there's no paperwork to sign, there's no way to get a deal done. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do, that I've also been working with agents that I work with on, is making sure that you get a formal counter offer if you're on the buy side from the listing agent. And that way you are still negotiating with the party on the other side rather than with yourselves. Because even if you agree to it and you come back, they could have gone and done something else, and there's no paperwork in place to create a contract.
What do you consider a formal counter offer?
Paperwork.
Like a revised agreement of sale that is signed? Okay.
Revised agreement. And the same thing holds true if you think about it on the listing side. If you make a formal counter offer, you also have an opportunity to construct a persuasive offer that's going to carry a lot more authority and a lot more influence than it would if you just hit them on the phone or throw out a casual email. So you have an opportunity to, if you will, craft your offer much more effectively on the listing side. But on the buyer side, you're protecting your client's interests by making sure that you have a contract that you can agree to get a deal done.
No, I agree. So I'll keep the question on you. So what do you think the important things that you want to focus on in order to be an effective negotiator in real estate?
Okay, so the first thing is training, which is what you would expect to hear from me. But it's primarily because negotiation is an enormous field. And I know, from Adam's viewpoint, being over on the legal side, we have a list of 125 books in our material that we offer to our students, and it doesn't even scratch the surface. Every major university around the world teaches some form of negotiation. The vast majority of it is the collaborative style of negotiation. And so if you want to be a good negotiator in real estate, you need to get good negotiation training, number one. Secondly, you need to be able to ask very effective questions. You need to be able, we were talking about information before, collaborative negotiations are also described as investigative negotiations because they're so dependent on getting good information. And that's information from your client, information from the other side, it's market information. In fact, there's three kinds of information that an agent typically will be looking at if they rarely define it. The first one is information that's observable. And that would be the condition of the home. It may be the behavior of the people on the other side. You can observe their negotiation style. The second would be available information, which is what you can easily find on the internet, MLS information, market data, and so forth. But the third kind, which is really more important, is what I refer to as discoverable information. And your ability to get information that is not otherwise clearly available by means of asking questions, building relationships, building trust, and having a good solid approach towards your client's goal is the area typically where most agents fail. And so that's one of the things that I would focus on. Next, it would be your persuasion skills. Most of us don't ever think in terms of how do we persuade and influence others. One definition of negotiation is the art of influence and persuasion. And so we like to do things, kind of by the seat of our pants, maybe the way that we've always done it. And we rarely decide to take advantage of what other people have learned and what other people have described and written about to teach us how to be effective persuaders. And then we've also mentioned a little bit about exchanges. It's learning how to find available exchanges in a deal to add value. Remembering that an exchange can be either tangible, like a refrigerator or a pool table, something like that, or it can be intangible. It can be a dollar amount, it can be a date, a contingency, things like that. And so the focus areas would be training, it would be your persuasion skills, and then it would be just understanding, the components that you can put together in a deal in order to create value, and then to claim it by getting it written down effectively in a contract.
That's great advice. Somebody had a question in the chat. You mentioned about discoverable information? What specifically you're referring to?
So, for example, the needs on the other side of the table. What are the primary needs that buyer or seller on the other side of the table is looking to satisfy in the deal? It may be things like maybe imperatives or pressure that they have on them. I like to talk about how if you're walking through a home and you go into the master bedroom closet and all there are men's clothes in the closet. Well, what is that going to be? Well, that may be a divorce. It may be a death. It may be they're just single, but there are little things that you can find out about clients by means of asking questions, talking to the agent, and helping your client make a connection with the other client so that they prefer doing business with you, and finding out the information that you need in order to adequately satisfy the needs on the other side, because that's how you get a deal done. So it would be anything going on the other side. It may be maybe in the process of asking questions, you might even uncover something that wasn't included in a disclosure, something that was overlooked that you need to know. Maybe it's the background of the seller or the buyer, their family situation, any number of things. But it's information that you have to ask for in order to get.
That was an amazing answer. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that? Leah, Adam, Nick, anything you want to add to what Mike said?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is I think Mike hit pretty much everything right there, is just to be creative also in reaching your goal. There can be solutions that are not, normal, or they're outside the box that you usually wouldn't come across. Just a quick example, I had a transaction that I was working on where my buyer was buying a property and the developer of that property had damaged an adjoining property. And there was some ongoing litigation between it was a 3-unit condo developer and the neighbor. Well, that made the property, in terms of a buyer coming in, they couldn't get lending because of this open litigation. There was an alleged title issue, but there really wasn't. So being creative and understanding the different moving parts of the transaction, I turned this into, my client fortunately had the ability that they could still do the transaction cash. So we used this as an opportunity to shave, I think, about $30,000 or $40,000 off of the purchase price, because we were already under contract. We were closing about a week or two away. The bank said we can't finance this because of litigation. So we took that and came up with a creative solution that got my client additional value on this property. So that's just the last thing I would add to what Mike said.
Yeah, good point. So I think we covered everything on that one. That was a really good summary between everybody that spoke. Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, unless you had something to add to that, but I'm going to turn it over to you. What are some strategies other than price that you use to build a solid offer? Let's say it's a competing bidding situation.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a standard real estate deal, price is only one factor of a deal, right? So you have, how quick are you going to close? Are you going to have an inspection period? How much deposit are you going to put down? Are you foregoing maybe certain things within a property, if it's a commercial property or things like that, that might be valuable to the owner and to you. So really it's about those other things that you could kind of bolster your offer up, maybe going in cash rather than having a mortgage that would have an appraisal. Those are ways of obviously making your offer look stronger. So price is only one part of it. It's really about how quick you're going to close. The big one is obviously due diligence. Can you lower the due diligence time, the period of time that you could basically back out for anything? So those are usually the ways that, again, and through that discovery period up front, understanding what this person wants. Obviously, if it's a new construction, it's sitting there vacant. That's an investor. They're paying time. They're paying money every day that property doesn't get sold. That's something that the quicker you close, the better. Now, if you have somebody who is living in a house, a 14-day close may not be beneficial to a home seller that's selling a property because they need some time to move out. So those are all things that you need to understand. And again, it comes back to motivation and doing your research as to what that person's looking for, and basically structuring the offer that way.
So how are you finding those things out? Are you asking the listing agent, what's important to your client? What are the most important pieces of the offer? How quick of a settlement are they looking for? What are the things that you ask in that situation?
Yeah, so that would definitely be something, say if I was representing a buyer, and it's totally fine to ask a seller's agent, why are they selling? What are they, what's the reason for them parting with this property? To just get some background information. You could also do your own information, research, go on public records, see when they bought the property. It's public on Bright. You could see when they refinanced or how much their mortgage is when they first bought it. And if they did any refinancing, you could see how much debt is on the property. So those are all things that you could kind of use to see like how motivated they are. If they have a lot of equity in the property and they've owned it for years and years and their cash basis of the property is so low, that might be someone that's a little bit more negotiable because they bought it so low that they have so much profit built into the property, and again, depending on what the listing agent tells you as to why they want to sell, then you might tailor your offer in a different way. So it's really important to kind of look at all those things when they bought it, how much debt, what they bought it for, and then do other research. Look them up on Facebook, look them up on LinkedIn, see what they do. Like I do all of that to kind of try to get a glimpse of who you're dealing with, especially when I'm representing a listing agent, a listing, understanding, what these people do for a living. Do they have a solid job? You have to kind of convey this to the seller and let them know based on your experience and judgment, who you think is going to be not only a person that is going to get your seller the best deal, but get to the finish line, which is one of the most important things, obviously.
Yeah, knowledge is power. And the reason why you ask all these questions is because, like we talked about in the beginning of what a successful negotiation looks like, how do you get to that end goal? In order to get to that end goal, you have to be asking the right questions. And you have to know what questions to ask, because the answers that you get will help you tailor the offer, help you tailor, the negotiation, or at least the strategy to get a deal done. And without knowing that information, you're trying to put a deal together in the dark. So, if you're afraid to ask those questions because you think the other agent's not going to give them to you, or if you're a listing agent and you don't want to give that information out, remember, we're all trying to have the same end goal here. No matter what way you want to get there, the end goal is to sell the property, right? The seller has their house listed on the market. They want to sell it. The buyer made an offer because they want to buy it, right? In the end, that is the ultimate goal. Now, of course, the buyer has a different path to get there, what that means, and the seller has a different path. But in the end, it's about making the deal. And if both sides work together to understand that that's truly the end goal, then you really have to work together in order to get that. And I think you guys all went over that.
I just wanted to add one other thing. No, and I always say it's doing that research. Basically, negotiation is all about, and I don't know if anybody said this yet, but it's all about leverage. It's really understanding that information and using it as leverage to get people to the finish line. So that's like one thing I always keep in the back of my mind, and it's truly all about leverage.
Yep, leverage and what's giving you the edge in the negotiation for sure.
Correct.
Leah,
not to jump in real quick, but I'd like to actually hear. I think you guys brought up a couple of things as far as, and you brought it up as well, is like asking the right questions. Does anybody have any good examples of some right questions? Because I was just, as you said that, brought up to my mind is one of the dumbest questions, and I hate hearing it, is why is your seller selling? I think that's like an old question, but you can actually, a question as simple as that actually can get a lot of information. Oh, they have to move. They got a new job offer out in Arizona and they need to move by December 1st or something along those lines. So, asking the right questions, I think, is, really, really important to get those right answers from the other side to, prepare and put together that strong offer.
Yeah, we can stick on that topic for a second, and anybody on the panel can chime in. What are some good questions that you have that you think work for you? Mike, I see you wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, because there's an arena of questions that people need to think about that agents, let's see fear to tread in, right? And that is to remember that when you are asking questions, it's perfectly acceptable to ask any kind of question that you want to. All right, because the fiduciary responsibility to protect confidential information on the other side is theirs, not yours. And so, for example, if you ask, are there other offers on the table, and they say yes, and then you say, well, can you share with me what the highest offer is you have so far? Well, most agents aren't going to tell you that, but occasionally you'll find one that will. We have a case study actually where that happens. My favorite question to ask, is there anything that we can, from a buyer's viewpoint, is there anything that we can include in this offer that will make it especially attractive to your seller? And it's just a way to get a positive perception on defining what that key need is. And a lot of times you will be the only agent that asks that question, and you'll find that one key component that will get you the deal when everybody else doesn't. And, you know, and when you're in competition, and they fail to do that. You know, is the earnest money, is it non-refundable at any point? Is it an all cash offer? Just any number of little things that you can ask about deals on the other side. And again, they may not give you the answer, but there's no fault and there is no liability for asking the question.
Yeah, those are great questions. Anybody else on the panel have any other questions that we didn't talk about that you use? Okay. All right. So Leah, I want to throw this next question back to you. And it's a similar question to what we talked about with Nick, but I'm going to throw it in a little different way to you because you're negotiating mostly. Well, actually, I'm asking you, are you, and then I'll ask you the question, are you mostly negotiating on behalf of the buyer to the banks, or are you representing the banks? Or are you representing?
So, funny story. My background is I was a bank side negotiator. I worked as a servicer negotiator for GSE and government loans for about 8 years, and then I became an auditor. But now my secondary job is to be a negotiator for actually buyer and seller. It's kind of, I'm the neutral party. So I'm Switzerland in this transaction. I help the seller with their portions, but then I negotiate their liens, but then I try to get the buyer their number met to match what the bank will take on the condition of the property as is. So it's kind of a really
what are some of the pieces
position
that you have to put together to build a solid offer? I mean, who are you're really trying to convince the bank, right? Because the seller
Right.
doesn't really matter what they want. It's really up to the bank and the buyer too.
So for my scenario, for short sale scenario, it's very opposite of a traditional sale. What comes in, what builds it is a lot of people like to say, or a lot of agents I hear say, oh, well, it has to be best and highest. It's not always the case because the highest may not be the best for several reasons. We've had the higher offers come in with contingencies that were just unreasonable. For example, one offer came in, the house was listed for 200,000, higher offer came in at 205, but they needed time to sell their house before they could purchase the short sale, which it's not conducive to the process. Because you have to provide proof of funds. So basically for a short sale, you're looking at contingencies, you're looking at the time frame they need to, the type of financing that they're using, the proof of that financing, and if there's any inspections or if they're waiving inspections, understanding that they are purchasing the property as is, because you'd be surprised how many agents buyer's agents don't explain to their clients that no, the seller will not make repairs. No, if you're trying to get an FHA loan, chances are it will not pass an FHA inspection. You'll have to go through for a FHA 2 or 3K loan or conventional private or, you know, hard money, however you want to go about it. It really kind of falls into that, the guideline. Then on top of that, I need to also make sure that I'm abiding by the foreclosure process. It also depends on how long the house has to be listed in the market before we can accept any offers. So for example, GSE guideline is 15 days in the market. We can't accept anything prior to that. If it is, it's automatically kicked out, no matter even if it's the best offer out there, we have to wait. So there's a lot of intricacies in regards to the best offer, building a strong offer for the bank. But once we get through those semantics, presenting that offer to the bank with a CMA, with pictures, 3 sold, 3 listed within the last 6 months in a 2-mile radius, with a repair estimate, with a possible appraisal if the buyer is so, you know, inclined to get their appraisal done early. That entire, basically we call it a value dispute package to go along with the offer to support. This is why the offer is as where it is, and you'd be surprised how low some of these offers come in. But at least the bank will know, okay, so we see the big picture, and then they do their checks and balances to make sure that our information jives with whatever they're given from their BPO or their appraisal agent.
And are you able to have a communication with the bank to ask what their end goal is? Meaning like what price do they need to get, or what the terms are that they're looking to get to make a deal?
It varies on the investor type. So if we have a Fannie or Freddie, we actually can go through them to get a list price guidance based on their most recent value done within, because once a house has gone into distress, or even if it hasn't been in distress, there's usually an appraisal that's done within the last year, or an assessment that's been done for property for taxes. The one that's the hardest to get it through is from USDA and VA. They do not like to give out their bottom line number, their minimum net proceeds, simply because they feel that we'll be cheating the system, not understanding that we're actually trying to make this go a little bit faster than dragging it out and going through, the roller coaster ride on the MLS where, oh, we listed it here because this is where we thought it should be, but then it either needs to go up much higher or go much lower. And then there's a lot of questions that are involved in that. So it just really depends.
Okay. No, thank you for that. It's good to get that different perspective. And, I say, thankfully, we haven't had to, you probably don't feel this way, but thankfully we haven't had to deal with that many short sales over the last handful of years. It was a lot. Short sales were like every other deal when I earlier on in my career, and thankfully that's gone away. But my guess is that's going to be coming back again this year and next year. And, as people can't really afford to sell their houses for what it's worth anymore. And anyway, so hopefully that doesn't come back. Next question's for Adam and for Mike. Adam, I'm going to start with you. I want to talk about what makes a good negotiator, and I want to hear what you think about what makes a good negotiator, and how do you make your negotiations a win-win? And I know, again, as an attorney, you're coming from as a different perspective and trying to get your client what you want, but in the end, you're trying to make a win-win to some degree. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think this all relates back to what we've been going over throughout most of this session, but it's basically getting to your client's goals. And most of the time, a lot of the times with negotiations, there is not always a win-win where everyone feels like they came out on top. And I think that's part of our jobs as the professionals, is to explain to our clients why what ultimately the transaction they're doing makes sense. Because I know, for example, with sellers, they're always generally looking for the maximum price to see it as a successful transaction. However, as the professionals, we know that what's on the contract at the beginning may not be what it actually closes at when you get through all the contingencies and the inspections, et cetera. So the price will get, potentially chopped and reduced, and the seller might not see that as a success. But as we've all said, the success really comes in getting the transaction completed and everyone being happy, not ecstatic always. I mean, sometimes you have that happen, but you want everyone to be generally happy at the end. Everyone feels like they've given something and gotten what they've expected on the transaction. And that's how I look at it, in it being a win-win negotiation in the transactional sense. With some of the other stuff I do with the litigation, it can be different because the goals are different, and there are much different considerations. For example, you're mentioning the foreclosure stuff. We do some of that work. Obviously there's different factors that go into that, such as minimizing losses, cost benefit, et cetera, that you would consider. And that does come in with the real estate transactional work, with the cost benefit on figuring out what components of the contract you may change in exchange for other things. So for example, you might take less money to do it as is with no inspections. So you're taking 10,000 less, but there could be issues that come up, and instead of chopping the price later, you're dealing with them now.
You're muted.
Yes, I am muted. Same question to you, Mike. What makes a good negotiator? How do you make the negotiation a win-win?
Well, probably the first thing I want to think about is keeping my client out of Adam's office for litigation.
Yes. We all want to keep our clients out of the attorney's offices.
I mentioned training a little earlier. I think that's really important. A good negotiator is going to have what we call a structured, disciplined approach to negotiating with our clients' money. In other words, we're able to put together, not only get good information, but when we take that information, put together a really solid plan. There was a question earlier about expectations, making sure that the client is aware of that and that their expectations for outcomes are rational, reasonable, and not well, anyway, rational, reasonable is a good place to stop with that. The good negotiator is going to have good empathy and caring and understanding for the other side, but still be able to strongly advocate for their client. I mentioned earlier also beating your next best deal in a win-win situation and maximizing your client's interest, adequately satisfying on the other side, and minimizing the impact of third parties. Negotiators are trying to persuade the other side to agree to what they're asking them to do. And so again, influence and persuasion is a big part of it. And so as you seek to do that, trying to think, I think my thought just slipped my mind, but in any case, to get them to agree to what you're asking them to do, and without goals in mind, without an understanding of the other side, without a way to relate that to them in a I guess in a way that encourages them to the value of the deal, it makes it really difficult to get an agreement done. And so again, I would just emphasize persuasion, training, and being able to get good information and put it together in a planned negotiation so you always know where you're going.
All right, cool. I appreciate that. Next question's for Jim and Nick. Jim, I want to start with you. What is the most complex negotiation you've ever handled? And as a listing agent, how do you protect your client through a tough negotiation?
It was funny. I was reading these notes over before you came through, and I'm just thinking about the most complex negotiation. Not one like truly stands out to me. I just think
wasn't with me, right?
No. Well, I think what's as far as like the complex negotiation, I think the more and more you jump into this, you realize that there's so many different ways to get a deal done and to structure a deal different ways. I've done, development deals where we've built in sellers' equity into positions. I've done I've done normal deals where we're doing plus or minus 2-3% off of appraisal prices, things along those lines. So nothing really jumps out to me, but I think what I'm trying to get to at this is there's always an opportunity to get some things done. It's up to the agents to figure out how to structure it and put that together. So there's so many different ways to put it. What was the second part, Noah?
Well, the question, what was the most complex negotiation you've handled? And as a listing agent, how do you protect your client during a tough negotiation? How do you keep your emotions out of it from ruining the deal?
That's we say a lot of times realtors are also their therapists. I mean, you're coaching through their emotions through a lot of different angles. And once again, I think it's always comes back to that first appointment and setting the expectation up front and letting them know what sort of marketplace they're in and what to expect and what you're seeing out there. They're coming to us as their trusted source. We're starting to see more and more, obviously heading into the winter markets where we are, we're going to see sellers that are on the market for 180 days get offers for $100,000 less than what they were expecting. So it's really just setting that up front for them and letting them know, hey, this may come, but if this does come, this is how we're going to react to it. And this is how we're going to, present back to them and things along those lines. So, I think it's just more or less just building it, keeping them sort of grounded, keeping their eyes on the prize, keeping them focused on the reason that they contacted you from the beginning.
Okay, good. Nick, same question to you, and I'll ask it again. What's the most complex negotiation you've handled? And as a listing agent, how do you protect your client during a tough negotiation?
Yeah, so the first part of the question, I would say, man, I've had a lot of weird deals I've done. One that I would say was pretty complex was representing a guy basically going into like investor overextended with private investors that had notes on a large portfolio of properties. I had kind of gained some rapport with the seller, the guy who owned it. However, I also gained rapport with his investors. And basically they got to the point where they were kind of forcing him to sell, where it got kind of convoluted, where I'm juggling between two people to get a deal done, where, someone is kind of like forcing their hand, but there's a price that the guy who owned them wanted to get, and you're trying to get that, as well as satiate the investors who just want to get their money back no matter what price it is, just because they want their money back. So in the end, it got done, but it was kind of like a big juggling act of several attorneys, the attorney for the owner, the attorney for the investors, the attorney for the buyers, and having to, have conference calls with multiple attorneys on multiple parties. And you have to kind of be the person that, because attorneys in certain circumstances will make deals a little bit more complicated than in our eyes than they should be. So it's kind of like drawing the line in the sand and trying to be the catalyst and kind of keep everybody on the line of, let's just get this to go forward, rather than focusing on the subtle minutia that could really drive people's emotions up. And then therefore, once people get emotional, they act irrational, and then the deal is done. So that was probably my biggest complex deal that I worked on. And that was, yeah. So, and then how would I protect if I'm a listing agent, how do I protect my seller? Again, I mean, that comes down to really understanding what your seller wants, right? And understanding what's a good deal to them, and really trying to get them to where they want to be. And being upfront with them, future pacing them in the beginning, like, Jim spoke about getting the 425 offer on a $500,000 house. Listen, I could list your house for $500,000, but here are the comps. It's not you just saying, yeah, the comps are lower. It's you actually giving them information that's real and saying, but this is kind of what your house is worth. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes people will overpay for a house or really pay up for a property in the beginning, in those first 14 days. But after 14 days, if we don't get an offer, then we're going to have to readjust the price. Do you agree with me? And you get them to say yes. So it's kind of future pacing them and letting them know what the situation is, and then sticking to it, and protecting what they do want, but also trying to keep them level-headed and not in some like twilight zone where they think that they're going to get $100,000 over what their property is worth.
I'm going to give Adam a chance to respond, because what I think I heard you say was that attorneys sometimes get in the way of a real estate deal, and they can sometimes mess things up. That's what I think I heard you say. If not, maybe. Yeah,
well,
Jim
not
said.
in a bad way, because our,
I'm not offended. There are plenty that do. I personally
I
try to get the deals to happen is my goal when I'm working with a client, because, I know if I was on the side, in the transaction, I would want the deal to happen. I do make it clear to the client, what the risks are with proceeding with certain aspects of the deal. But I try to avoid, my goal when I get an assignment is to make the transaction happen, unless for some reason they don't want it to happen, and then I would blow it up. But there's plenty of lawyers that will get into, I can't tell you how many contracts I receive that's changing either terms that were originally agreed upon, or putting in little things that are really meaningless, but for some reason it just sticks in the other party's craw and they won't do the deal because of it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the biggest thing. And no offense to the attorneys on the call, but sometimes when an attorney's involved, at least in Pennsylvania, where it's not commonplace, the transactions become more difficult when an attorney's involved, because people will have their guards up, right? And then their emotions get in the way. And when emotions get in the way of a deal, that's typically what ruins it, right? So like you said, an attorney could just change a little term in an agreement, which is meaningless, but that alone can annoy somebody to the point where their emotions get involved. And once that happens, like, the deal just starts to blow up. So I guess let's stick with that topic. I know that wasn't a question on this. So how do you manage the emotion? And anybody can answer this, but Adam, we'll start with you since we're on you. How do you manage the emotions of the deal when you're in these negotiations? How do you control that to keep the deal on track? And Adam, and then Mike, will go to you, and whoever else wants to jump in.
Sure. So I think the most important way to manage the emotions is to manage the expectations up front in that initial meeting. If, there's some agents, people, the seller will come in and say, I want $600,000 for my house. The house is worth 400, and the agent will just yes them, list the property, and then the seller is mad or angry when the property sits on the market for 30 days with no offers, no interest, no showings. So I think the main thing is first to manage your client's expectations so that their emotions are in line with what they expect. They don't get offended when they get a $425,000 offer on a $600,000 ridiculous price. And then when it comes to the actual negotiation or putting together the transaction, it's trying your best, because sometimes with emotion, logic leaves the room. And it makes it very hard for people to appreciate that that what they're doing really just doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things. And they have to, and also this goes back to the original managing their expectations, is making sure they trust you and that they understand that you know what you're doing, so that they will listen to your advice as part of the transaction. So it all really boils back to the initial introduction and communications. And then as you're going through the negotiations, when you get the low offers, I would go back with, facts that can show your client why that made sense or why that was logical. I wouldn't push back and tell them they're wrong and disagree with them, but I would explain to them why, they came back with this offer, what might make sense coming back from a logical standpoint on a counter offer. But it's not easy. And it's especially because it's such an emotional and large transactions in most people's lives, and sometimes the largest transaction, that it's definitely not an easy task. But you have to just do your best to try to separate out the logic in the transaction and the terms from, being mad or angry or upset about, an offer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Mike, I saw you unmute yourself. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, you mentioned my name, so I thought I'd throw it in. I mean, Adam's right about that. And one of the things that we have to think about is that, and the thought that escaped my mind a minute ago, is that from a persuasion standpoint, people make decisions based on emotion, and then they justify it logically. And it's a right brain, left brain concept. And so when people start letting their emotions get out of control, they are perceiving an outcome that they believe to be disadvantageous to them. And so as a skilled negotiator, I want to manage emotions on both sides of the table. And so typically what I want to do, number one, is I want to remain calm and professional myself, because again, that builds trust and influence with your client. And then secondly, I want to let them know if they are perceiving a disadvantageous outcome, what the outcome is that we need to seek, how we're going to get there, and put that picture in their mind as we proceed on with the negotiation. It's controlling that perception of outcome that helps control the emotions of the client.
Yeah, when I'm in a negotiation, I always try to tell my client, whether I'm on the buyer or the seller side, not to let your emotions get in the way of the deal, because once the emotions get in the way, then that ruins it. And sometimes you're in a difficult situation where maybe the seller's difficult, or usually let's just say the seller's difficult. And I try to keep my buyers, I try to remind them that they're not, when they buy this house, they don't get the seller along with them, right? When they're buying the house, they're buying the house. And once this transaction's done, they're never going to have to deal with this seller again. So you have to see past the transaction to realize the reason why you put an offer in this house in the first place. You love this house, you love the neighborhood, whatever the reasons are that you decided to purchase this in the first place. Don't let the negotiation ruin your dreams of getting this house. And it's about setting those expectations with the clients to help them realize, keep their eye on the prize, if you will. All right. All right. Next one up, Leah, I want to come back to you on this one. Well, actually, let's stick to, no, let me switch to the next topic here. Do you believe that a negotiation is a debate, and why or why not?
Yes, it is. So it is, let me rephrase. It is depending on the party that you're dealing with. So, with a bank, it most definitely is, because the bank's opinion of the value of the home may not necessarily be what the true value is. For example, one of my transactions was with Wells Fargo. The house was listed for $450. Buyer came in at $325, which was a little low, but definitely had the documentation to back up his low offer. They came in at a value of $860,000 and blew my mind. Asked them where they got the value from. It was advised they did what's called a desktop BPO. So they just went to Zillow and pulled up some numbers and gave us a value. So I had to go back and not only do a value dispute, but to actually challenge them and tell them to give me where they are be able to constitute that this home is worth almost $1 million. So that's definitely debatable, and it's definitely an argument at that point. I mean, for lack of a better term. When it comes to a buyer or seller, in some situations it can be with the buyer. Simply if a buyer comes in with an unrealistic offer and isn't able to support their offer, we've actually had to explain to the seller where an offer. We've had sellers actually try to counter a buyer because they are not understanding that though it is a short sale, there's not really much to negotiate, because at that point, if the value just isn't there, there's not gonna be any more money. And we've had to educate, unfortunately, sellers to let them know that with a short sale, there is proceeds of sale to the seller at that point, if there's not a relocation assistance being provided by the short sale bank. So in short, to answer the question, I'll have to go back and say yes, it most definitely is. And that would be the reason why.
Anybody else have a thought on that? Do you feel that a negotiation is a debate?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I definitely think it is. I mean, it's someone's putting forth something, and then as we should get them an answer back, and it's, they say it's doing the dance, but it truly is. It is kind of like a debate. They're going to put forward their info and why they think it's worth this and yada yada, and then me representing my client, I'm going to do the same, and we're going to kind of work back and forth until we get to the deal. So I would say it's pretty much like a debate.
Okay, Mike, you had a comment also?
Yeah, it is a little bit like a debate. I prefer to call it an interaction, just from a calming standpoint. But if you think about it, people will do what they believe to be in their self-interest. And if the objectives of my client, if I'm able to frame those in the context of the self-interest of the other side, they're going to be more likely to agree. When you look at a seller that has a particular disadvantage, either its condition, maybe its market, things like that, from a negotiating power standpoint, my ability to clearly express that weakness, but in terms of their self-interest, turns it from a negative or from a threat to a positive outcome. And a good negotiator will work very, very hard to do that, because it makes the deal to their client's advantage in terms of benefit, but it still maintains the emotional balance and the positive aspects of the outcome, so that both parties are satisfied.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. All right, I want to finish up with one final question, but this is more of I want everyone on this call to have something to take home with them, something that they can use. If you haven't already gotten a whole bunch of knowledge out of this call already, but I want to go through some objection handlers, and I want to, anybody on the panel can jump in, but I want to give you guys some situational comments that may come up in a negotiation, and I want to see how you handle it, what creative response that you have, or how you can keep the deal on track with something like this. So I'm going to start with Jim and sort of work my way over on the screen. So Jim, somebody puts an offer in on your property, and let's just say it's priced well. Okay, let's just say it's priced well, but the offer is not a full price offer. The buyer's agent says, "This is the most my client can pay." How do you counteract that?
For an objection handler side, so the property's priced well, and we obviously know that, the seller obviously knows that. I always like to put my position in the other side, into the other agent's head, as far as saying, well, you understand that the property is positioned and priced extremely well, and allow them to explain and why they're getting to the situation they are. My biggest point of view, and what I always try to do throughout a negotiation, is to always be the calming and exciting, happy person to kind of push this through and kind of allow them to see where they are. So I would position it as, if that's the best that your client can do, there's probably a multiple number of buyers that could probably do a little bit better. And that's what we're going to have to sit and wait for at this point. Something along those lines to let them know that obviously their best is not going to be the best for our client.
back to what we talked about earlier about asking good questions, the way I would respond to something like that is with a question. Well, you said this is the most your buyer can pay, right? Is that the most they can pay based upon the purchase price or based upon monthly payments, right? And then you're going to say, I don't know, what are you going to say? You're going to say monthly payments or purchase price, right? You say, well,
Yep.
if it's based upon monthly payments, how much, what is the maximum monthly payment that they're able to pay? And you're going to say $3,000 a month, right? And it would say, all right, well, have you thought of other creative ways to get them to that payment? Have you thought about buying down the interest rate? Have you thought about a seller's assist? Like, right. So you're then at that point giving them some creative strategies to help answer the question, because we all know a lot of times when they say that's the most my client could pay, it's not true, right? But if it is true, in the case where it is true, and you offer some alternative ways to get them what you want to get, a lot of times you have to remember the other agent on the other side of the deal may not have thought of that idea, right? So this is the collaborative part of the negotiation and trying to work together and be creative and trying to figure out how to make a deal happen, right?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as coaching the other side. A lot of the times, there's thousands of realtors here in the city, and not many have the experience of certain levels as some people do. So they don't look at it and position it in that sort of way. So if cash up front's a tough situation, we'll have you look at a seller's assist, where interest rates are, you may be able to keep some money back in your pocket, things along those lines. So there's always definitely a couple ways to go to coach them through all that stuff.
Yeah. When you're negotiating price with somebody, you're negotiating in thousands, right? I'll count, I'm countering you. I'll come down by $5,000, right? Now, $5,000 is a lot of money, but when you really break it down into monthly payments, $5,000 might be what, $20 a month, something like that, or whatever the number ends up being. Well, $20 a month doesn't seem like that much money, but $5,000 does seem like a lot of money. So if you break it down into a term that people can understand, especially because you have to remember that a lot of times, especially when we're dealing with first-time home buyers, a first-time home buyer is typically a renter at the time that they make the offer. And a renter thinks in terms of monthly payment, right? I pay $1,500 a month. I pay $2,000 a month. They don't think in terms of $400,000 house. They think in terms of monthly payments. Yet we as real estate agents talk to them in a language they don't understand, right? We talk to them in a language of hundreds of thousands instead of monthly payments. So breaking it down and talking the same language that somebody else is talking, and again, building that trust that we talked about earlier, will help and assist in the negotiations, because coming up another $20 a month may be okay to somebody, but paying another $5,000 may not be okay, even though they're both exactly the same thing. Right. All right. I want to put this, actually, instead of me asking all the objections, I want to open this up to the participants in the Zoom meeting. I want you guys to throw some objections to the panel, and I want to hear how they will answer it. So who has a situation that they would go over? Let's hear how the panel would answer it. You can unmute yourself if you have a question. If you have a objection handler that you want to throw out.
I have a question.
Is it an objection handler? We're not getting any questions just yet.
Well, I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
Like if I submitted a offer with a FHA mortgage, I'm always finding that they're turning those down. Is there a way to do an objection handle on that, or is that just kind of just the way the cookie crumbles?
Anybody on the panel want to take that one?
Well, for me, if I'm representing a seller and I get an offer with an FHA approval on it, first off, do I know the mortgage broker that's approving the mortgage? Are you getting a buyer financial information sheet with that pre-approval? There's really, I mean, if your client has good credit, has good financials, there should be no reason that someone does not take an FHA loan, unless there's certain particulars with the house that it may not pass an FHA inspection. But if it's a standard house, I mean, that's just as good as any other
Well, I find
mortgage.
it a lot with like multi-offer situations. They'll say like, "Oh, we just went with conventional. It wasn't as high as yours, but you know, we just felt like it was like safer." Which I
Yeah, and
understand, but like, is there any way to kind of overcome that?
yeah, I mean, I would say right up front, just let them know that your buyer is a very stable buyer. Their finances are in order. I understand it's an FHA, but this is as good as any other conventional loan that you would get just based on this person's job and financial positioning. That's what I would say.
Okay.
As well as obviously look at the other terms and try to make your offer look better by maybe putting a higher deposit, quicker close, less inspection period.
So,
And-
hey,
Okay.
so one of the things that I could offer to you would be a little more complex, but if you want to strategize a pre-offer call where you talk with the listing agent and you say, all right, let's talk about, what are your requirements for closing date? What are your requirements for earnest money? What are your requirements for leaseback? What are your requirements for financing terms? I mean, I have lost deals for exactly the kind of things that you're talking about. I lost a conventional deal. My client was doing an 80-15-5. The winning deal, which was $1,000 less than ours, they were doing an 80-20. And the client just thought that was stronger financing, which it's not really. But also to Nicholas's point,
Right.
make sure that that your lender, that you have a good relationship with them, and have the lender call them and talk to the listing agent and talk about how strong your client is. But in the beginning, you might want to ask them if an FHA loan is a deal breaker and find out, because you may want to go look at another house if it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Anybody, so we can open it up to any questions that anybody has that they didn't get a chance to ask during the interview, if you will. What other questions do you guys have for the panel? You have some very talented real estate agents and professionals on this call. You have them for the next couple minutes. What questions do you have? Nothing, no questions?
I have a question.
Okay, I can't see where you are, but go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
I see you now.
So I work on the main line, and I sometimes let's say representing a buyer, and sometimes the seller is a high net worth person, maybe owns multiple properties, and they aren't operating under the normal incentives of a seller because they can hold that property for a year if they don't get their price. And they'll be a hard bargainer, and I'm trying to make a deal happen because my buyer won't walk away and buy their second best choice. So how do I get the best deal for them in a situation where they want it more than the seller, and the seller doesn't need to sell it in a quick time frame?
Good question.
I run into those situations where there's a major lack of motivation on the selling side. I think the first thing is obviously alerting, is having that kind of like Mike's talking about, is figuring out exactly what their drivers are and what the reason is why they're on the market, and positioning your offer to sort of incentivize them based off of their wants and needs. If price isn't a major driving factor, there's a reason that they put the home on the market besides just to sell it. So it's definitely opening up that line of communication and figuring out and diving a little bit deeper and making a few pre-offer authorization calls like Mike was talking about, to figure out what their driving factors are. What do they want more besides just the price, and try to structure in that way. I mean, we're running into that a lot right now. In a hot market, you see people put things up for, ridiculously high price. So, you just have to sort of try to figure out what's their main motivating factor and what's really going to, drive them here to, get this thing closed up.
You also have to remember that most agents just kind of throw stuff on the wall to see if it's going to stick. And when you take the steps to really inquire, to get involved, to have that conversation with the agent on the other side, you really differentiate yourself and your client in terms of your interest level. And I think it gives you a real opportunity to find out things that other agents won't. And like Jim's talking about, to find out what their drivers are, what will really kick a deal into gear for them.
Point. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Mine's not real estate related, but just kind of thinking about structuring partnerships.
Yeah, I just saw that. So I can respond to it. So the first thing, I mean, in terms of structuring partnerships, if you're doing, I guess this would be in relation to purchasing a property, maybe with a partner, and figuring out the best way to structure the deal. I mean, the first thing that I tell anyone that's going into a partnership is, do you know that person that you're partnering with? Because it's essentially a legal marriage on whatever documentation you're going to use, and they're people that you are going to have that relationship as long as you own this asset. So you want to make sure you know the people that you're doing business with or entering into the partnership with. The next thing is what everybody's expectations is, again, on this project or this, if it's a rehab, a fix and flip, a rental, who's managing the rehab, who's responsible for going there to make sure the contractors are working, who's responsible for making the payments. On a rental, who's responsible for dealing with tenant requests, who's responsible for trying to get it leased. Making sure that you have a clear expectation and scope of each partner's responsibility is vital at the beginning of the partnership, because that's where you can have a lot of issues later when what one person's expectations are don't match up with another's. When forming any type of business relationship, I recommend you put something in writing, even just an email in the starting point with what the splits are and how it's going to be managed, and then migrating it into a more formal document, just to make sure everyone is on the same page, because that's usually where you'll see these partnerships go bad. And then another thing to consider, especially with real estate partnerships, is when you're using an LLC versus a partnership or a corporation, or sole proprietorship, which is just you, there's different lending options available. So that's another thing that you're going to want to consider. Sometimes the rates are different if you own it personally versus as a company. But those are a lot of the initial considerations you'll want to give in setting up your whatever the business organization is that you want.
Good question.
So Noah, can I make a quick comment about your best and most my client can pay situation?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the first thing is that's a lowball offer, and if I get a lowball offer in on a property, the first thing I want to do is I want to find out if they're bluffing. And so a lot of times, what you can do, because that's really the only justification for a lowball offer, is it's all my client can afford. So a lot of times, what you can do is you can come back with price. And add in something else, like washer, dryer, refrigerator, something like that, and see how they counter. And if they counter back with agreement towards that, or if they move in that direction, then you'll know it was a bluff and you have more to work with. And so you need to be sensitive to, are they just trying to get a deal, or is it really the situation that as they're describing it? The more that you know about the agent and their negotiating style, the more likely you are to be able to determine that. But you can also question them directly on that basis as well.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard on both ends, this is the most my client can pay, or this is their highest and best offer, or this is the lowest the seller's willing to come down. And then magically it wasn't their highest and best offer, and it wasn't the lowest they can come down. It's, people I think use that bluff, that term, a little too loosely these days, and it ends up backfiring, especially if it's an agent that you deal with on a regular basis. When they say it's highest and best, it's not always their highest and best. So it's, again, about knowing who you're dealing with.
So explaining more on strategies to flush out a bluff. The key thing with bluffs is asking them to justify their position. And so, for example, Noah, if you go back to your $425,000 offer, the first thing that I would come back is I would want to make sure we're both on the same playing field in terms of the comps and the value of the property. And so I would ask you to justify that position first, in order to get into a more functional conversation relative to my client's needs. But anytime that you think that you're dealing with a bluff, you can do it. There's a lot of things you can do. You can threaten to walk away from the deal. You can, express your dissatisfaction with the offer, that it's below what your client is willing to accept. So again, if you know what your client's minimum is, that's going to help. The more that you know about what your client's goals are, the better able you are to negotiate from what we would call a position of strength, which is having preset limits, your moral code, your integrity, those kind of things from the direction that you want to negotiate. Someone who is a dishonest negotiator and bluffs a lot will tend to be a manipulator. But from a professional real estate standpoint, the difference between manipulation and negotiation is going to be your intent. And we should always view negotiation through the lens of the code of ethics. And we also need to hold the other side accountable to that.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you guys made some amazing points today, and I want to thank everybody for being on the panel today. You guys, hopefully you got a lot of great knowledge out of it. It's always good to see that, you know, like most of the people that started off the call are still on the call. That's how you know that you provide some great value today. I took a lot of notes. I mean, I have a whole list of notes here. Hopefully you guys got a lot. We recorded this. We'll be sending this out to everybody that was on here. If you want to rewatch this again, if you missed some points, if you want to reach out to any of the panelists individually after the fact, I'm sure they would be happy to answer more of your questions. But, you know, thanks for coming out today. We have a great week of Education Week still to go. We have 3 more days of Education Week. So join us back here tomorrow, same link, 1 p.m. tomorrow. And have a great day, guys. We'll see you real soon. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Noah. Later.
Thank you.
Great time, Noah.